Good afternoon. Can people hear me? Thank you. I'm so glad to see all the conversation, and we'll have a little time for more conversation afterwards. I just have Ray and I essentially want to welcome you to our campus. My name is Katie Dyer. I'm a professor of child and family science. I'm also the interim associate dean of the Craig School of Business here at Fresno State.
And I'm Ray Hall and professor of physics here at Fresno State. I also serve as the academic senate chair for the last few years. So it's kind of fun to have that overview of the university.
We are really happy to welcome you to our beloved campus. Ray earned his bachelor's degree here at Fresno State and later returned as a professor of physics in 1999. I came as faculty in 2000, so we've been here a long time. I will leave bragging about our campus to our campus president and to our library dean. We want to introduce you to the Lilienfeld Alliance.
So in brief introduction, Lilienfeld Alliance is named for Scott Lilienfeld, as many of you know. He's a psychologist who died way too young in 2020. And he was a clinical psychologist who called out his colleagues and other academics to not allow so much pseudoscience to be infiltrating the field as it's practiced and sometimes as it's taught. So he really characterizes pseudoscience sometimes rides the coattails of real science. And he kind of chastised his colleagues for failing to identify the nonsense in their midst. In his discipline, he identified things like facilitated communication and recovered memory therapy, both that just have no grounds in empiricism, and other clinical fads based on fundamental misunderstandings on human psychology. So each discipline he noticed, though, and he's trying to sell it, and it's kind of what we're going to be trying to do here, has their own false beliefs that need to be called out and integrated into the way we teach them. So personal experience, we know that's not very reliable, and other cognitive biases all human beings share. And others sometimes intentionally spread these bad false beliefs for unscrupulous reasons, and we need to be able to call those out and recognize them.
For those of us who teach at a college level, we might assume that those false beliefs are going to simply fade away. They will effortlessly dissolve in the presence of the truth that we teach in our classrooms. Scott called this the Alka-Seltzer approach. He says it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Alka-Seltzer works. The approach doesn't.
Instead, unless we challenge and refute false beliefs, those false beliefs interfere with students' ability to learn new content, learn the things we're trying to teach them. If the false beliefs stay there, they intervene in that process. Also, if we do not confront these false beliefs, then they might do well in our classes, and pretty much as soon as they leave, the false belief just pops back and replaces what we think we've taught them. Scott famously said that pseudoscience belongs in the college classroom. He says we must bring it in, metaphorically set it on the table, examine it carefully. He suggested that college faculty could then demonstrate and thereby promote critical thinking by examining the quality of evidence, examining the quality of sources of information, identifying mistakes, the fakes, the frauds. This is the refutational approach to the teaching of critical thinking. And the Lilienfeld Alliance is here to continue Scott's mission by promoting the refutational approach to the teaching of critical thinking in higher ed.
So you'll hear more about Scott and the refutational approach tomorrow. But these are the ideas that brought together the first members of the Lilienfeld Alliance. Katie and I, along with Nat Pasternak. Nat, can you please raise your hand? Oh, there she is, right in front row. Thanks so much. And also Rodney Schmaltz from MacEwan University. Thank you so much, you guys. Alberta, Canada, yeah. So started meeting up with other professors at the meeting of something called the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. Maybe you know about Skeptical Inquiry magazine, but this was their annual conference. So all of us were teaching critical thinking by refuting pseudoscience and other nonsense in our respective disciplines. We started sharing resources and discussing issues. And last year we met independently of the SciCon and for the first time, and it was very successful up in Alberta. Fantastic. The conversation was good, so good, we are continuing it this year, and we're delighted to welcome many new people to this conversation and the exchange of ideas, strategies, and resources. And with that, I would like to have our president of the university come up and say a few words about the Central Valley and welcome you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you today. I'm going to give you just a little brief snippet of the Central Valley, and then a bit of a snippet from me as well. I came to the Central Valley when I was 10, and then I went away for college, and then I came back as a professor. I taught for about 13 years in the classroom. My field is Spanish and Portuguese poetry. So I fully understand what you are doing here. You're refuting these myths that are out there. I'm heavily influenced by Derrida and by Foucault as well. I actually took classes with Derrida at Irvine. And with that, of course, comes a lot of questioning and a lot of re-questioning and reassessing of all of this. So I appreciate very much the focus of this group and this conference as well. I came back, as I told you, as a professor. After that, I became the dean, and then I became the provost, and then eventually I became the president of Fresno State. This is my 6th year as president of Fresno State. So I tell you this to say the following. When my becoming president is not just a job, it's actually a life mission for me. I grew up here. I know my students pretty well. We are the 9th most diverse city in all of the US. We have an incredible amount of languages spoken in the Valley. We have about 120 languages that are spoken here in the Valley. You will find food from all the regions of the world and even more. It is a valley that is completely plentiful. We produce 25% of the nation's food supply for the entire US. And then after that, we manage to export the rest for the rest of the world. So just giving you a bit of a context as to what the valley actually produces. Within all of this, then, what I see with my students, many of whom are on financial aid, 85% are on financial aid, 67% are first generation. This gives you sort of like a sense of the type of students that we're bringing into Fresno State. We are proud to say that we pride ourselves in whom we accept, not in whom we reject. So we have a 95% acceptance rate at Fresno State. And within that, let's see, when was that? Is it 2 or 1? I can't remember right now. But a weekend ago, perhaps, we had the graduation, and we had 6,166 students graduate. That's our average output for graduation for Fresno State. 80%, I know that I'm giving you a lot of statistical information, so sorry for that, but 80% stay in the region, which means that this university is extremely invested in the Valley. We are an engaged university, not only in the fact that our students stay in the region after they graduate, but we also produce about 1.6 million hours of community service per year. And we have done that for the past 15 years. So just to give you a sense of where we are in terms of research, our main research areas, of course, are ag. Ag is a huge part of the region's economy, and of course, it drives a lot of the economic growth of the region as well. But along with that, of course, is water sustainability. Water is huge for us here in the Central Valley. Without water, we would not be able to produce what we produce for the nation and the world. And then alongside with that, of course, is healthcare and then teacher preparation. We are the third highest producers of teachers in all of the state of California. And the first in music, actually, for which I'm very proud because I was at University of Humanities. So that's near and dear to my heart. With that, I'm going to just leave you with this refutation as a teaching strategy. I love that. I wish I could stay with you throughout the entire day and more. I would rather be with you than in the meetings that I have lined up for the rest of the afternoon. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you. I know that I was in Dr. Hall's critical thinking class once, and I completely thoroughly enjoyed the debunking of the myths, and I especially appreciated the students. You know, I was there towards the end of the semester. The students actually were very much adept in saying, this is false, and this we could talk about even more. So I appreciate you very, very deeply, and I welcome you to Fresno State. Thank you.
Thank you, Saul, for the warm welcome. I would now like to ask Janet Crum to speak to us a little bit about this amazing space that we are in right now. Thank you, Janet.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I am Janet Crum. I am Dean of Library Services here at Fresno State. I've been here for almost 2 years, so I'm still a little bit of a newbie. I actually prepared remarks that go in a little different direction than talking about the building, but I am delighted to welcome you to our library. It is lovely. I encourage you to get out and explore it a little bit. It's very quiet right now because the semester just ended and there's not a lot going on. So you can kind of roam around and not worry about disturbing anybody. And I really encourage you to do that. And I'm happy to answer questions at any point in the event. I am a conference attendee as well, so I will be around. Like President Jimenez Sandoval, I have some meetings that are going to be a lot less fun than this conference, but I do plan to be at as many conference events as I can. So with that, I am thrilled to be attending the conference with you. I'm looking forward to the presentations, to getting to know at least some of you throughout the next couple of days. I'm going to try to keep my remarks brief, but I want to take just a moment, to talk about the role of librarians in supporting our shared work in advocating for truth and evidence-based factual learning. So a core part of our mission as librarians is to help students develop information literacy. So now I'm going to throw a definition at you. According to the American Library Association, a person who is information literate, quote, must be able to recognize when information is needed and have the ability to locate, evaluate, and use effectively the needed information. Unquote. So this definition comes from a white paper that goes on to say, quote, ultimately, information literate people are those who have learned how to learn, unquote. I love that last bit because we're not born knowing it all, and no matter how hard you study in college, you're never going to learn it all. So we need to help people become lifelong learners who can find actual evidence to inform their knowledge and their opinions and cut through the nonsense, of which there is much. And so that is very much the business of those of us who teach and invest in information literacy. Now, I want to come back to that white paper, and you're going to have a little quiz at the end. But don't worry, you don't have to study for it. I'm going to share another quote because I think this one's going to resonate with you. Here we go. Quote, people are daily subjected to statistics about health, the economy, national defense, and countless products. One person arranges the information to prove his point. Another arranges it to prove hers. One political party says the social indicators are encouraging. Another calls them frightening. One drug company states most doctors prefer its product. Another, quote, proves, unquote, doctors favor its product. In such an environment, information literacy provides insight into the manifold ways in which people can all be deceived and misled. Information literate citizens are able to spot and expose chicanery, disinformation, and lies, unquote. Does any of that sound familiar to today? Yeah? Right? Sure. Here's your pop quiz. Can anybody guess when those words were written? Ooh, we have a brave soul. 1989, actually. 37 years ago. 1930 would have been great, though. But yeah, 1989, when I was an undergrad, or just finished undergrad. So, the problems we face are not new problems. They're old problems that have been multiplied and magnified to a staggering extent in the decades since those words were written. Thank you, social media. And we're all united in trying to fight the deluge of chicanery, disinformation, and lies. For those of you who are instructional faculty, I'm going to put in a little commercial here. Here we go. I hope you already see librarians as your allies in this fight. And if you don't, I hope you will. Critical thinking depends on evidence and the ability to, in the words of that white paper I like to quote, locate, evaluate, and use information. I'm proud to be part of a profession that centers those skills. And I'm also proud to host this opening day of LiliCon here in the Fresno State Library. I hope your time at the conference is engaging and fruitful. And if there's anything I can do at any point to make your time here in the library or at Fresno State more enjoyable or useful, please just let me know. I'll be around. Welcome.
Okay, thank you for that. That was lovely, both introductions. And I have the privilege, my name is Natalia Pasternak. For those who don't know me, I'm one of the organizers of LiliCon and the Lilienfeld Alliance. And it's my privilege to introduce our main keynote speaker for the conference, Dr. Stuart Vyse. So Dr. Vyse is a behavioral scientist, a teacher, and a writer. He has a PhD in psychology and a BA and master degrees in English literature. He's a fellow of the American Psychological Association, the Association for Psychological Science, and the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He has taught at Providence College, the University of Rhode Island, and also Connecticut College. His academic interests include decision-making, behavioral economics, philosophy, behavior analysis, and belief in the paranormal. He's also written a number of books, which I really, really recommend. And when we did a book analysis for one of our papers of how many students were using books with refutation analysis, his book came out second. So yeah, I'll tell you who the first was later. So some of his books, A Very Short Introduction to Superstition by the Oxford Very Short Introduction series. He also wrote Believing in Magic. This was the number 2 that a lot of professors were using, Believing in Magic, The Psychology of Superstition. And his latest one, more recent one, is The Uses of Delusion, Why It's Not Always Rational to Be Rational. So I really recommend you get all 3 of them. They're really good. So Dr. Vyse is really well known for his books, but not so many people know about his scholarly work, which is just as important. He is a very, very well-published author in peer-reviewed papers. He has published a lot on autism, on facilitated communication. He also has a lot of popular science articles in like popular magazines, science magazines. And I think recently he has been very brave writing about the overdiagnosis of autism and how it impacts access to treatment for children who really need it. And this is a topic that needs refutational analysis, that needs critical thinking, and that has a real impact in society. So thank you for doing that. And it takes a brave person to do that on these days. So some funny things about Dr. Vyse. In 2019, I was still in Brazil, and I run an institute in Brazil, an NGO called Institute Question of Science, to promote science-based public policies, and of course, to promote critical thinking. So I invited Dr. Vyse to Brazil to give talks on superstition and also to give lectures on autism at the psychology school at the University of São Paulo. He didn't know me back then. And all it took, he's such a kind person that all it took was one email from someone he didn't know, inviting him to come all the way down to Brazil. And he just said, yes, I think I can do it. And so we had a wonderful time together. And the lectures were amazing. He was super well received, both by the general public in Brazil, talking about superstition, and especially the students at the university were super engaging and loved his talk about autism. So it was amazing. But something happened after his trip to Brazil. And I don't know why, but everyone that comes to, so the university in São Paulo is of course in São Paulo, but everyone that comes to Brazil, especially for the first time, they want to go to Rio because it's much more famous. And Rio is famous, of course, for the beautiful beaches. So everybody wants to go to Rio. And I actually told him, you know, there are places that are even more beautiful than Rio, and they are not as crowded, and they have like better beaches, and they are not as violent, so you're not as likely to be robbed or mugged or have your pockets picked. So I told him everything about Rio, but did he listen to evidence? And you know, he teaches critical thinking. But then, so funny thing happened, because he was in Brazil with us in São Paulo in August. And then, because he didn't listen to evidence, he went to Rio. I'm sure he had a great time, but 10 days later, so I checked the dates. He was in Brazil in August 8, and then in August 16, he publishes an essay about how much he hates the beach. Yeah, I just have to read you parts of it, because I think he was really traumatized by his real experience. So this is what he wrote. This is a paragraph. Let's start with the foundation, sand. Sand is only slightly better than dirt. True, it is softer and does not soil your skin and clothes as much as actual soil, but it sticks to you and finds its way into towels, clothes, shoes, cars, and occasionally bed sheets. It's also abrasive. They make sandpaper out of it. When the wind blows, it gets all over your stuff and into your hair, mouth, and eyes. Finally, sand may look clean and smooth, but don't kid yourself. We all know that dogs pee in it, seagulls poop in it, drinkers pour the dregs of their beers into it, and smokers stub out their butts in it. The beach is a combination cat box, ashtray, and trash receptacle that practically naked people frolic in. This is right after he came back from Brazil, from Rio. And then he goes on to say that, okay, so he knows it's beautiful and he likes to watch the ocean. So he has a solution. And then he says, my ideal solution is a quiet beachside bar with a view of the sea. It needn't be anything fancy, just a shady place where I can get a cool drink, read my book, and look up from time to time to watch the water rushing toward the land. If this appeals to you, you are welcome to join me. I probably won't engage you in conversation, but I can guarantee a stress-free, safe, and aesthetically pleasing experience. So, Stuart, next time I'll make sure that you don't go to Rio. Please listen to evidence. And maybe, I don't know, just maybe we can have the next LiliCon, or maybe the one after that, in a place just like he described. I would suggest not Rio, but northeastern Brazil, in a nice resort where then you can really watch the sea and the sand with a beer and a book. Please, everyone, welcome Dr. Stuart Vyse.
Oh my God. I'm confronted with my own words. I will say that, first of all, thank you, Natalia. That was embarrassing but wonderful. I actually wrote at least half of that essay in my hotel room in Rio. It occurred to, I was inspired. I really was, and it has become. It's published on Medium, and it's just I throw sometimes little essays up there, and it's become one of the more popular things I've written. And strangely, oh well, I didn't want you to associate it with the trip, but there's nothing that mentions Rio in it actually. So anyway, well, I'm very happy to be here, and I want to say to begin with, I hope I can live up to that introduction. But I was told that we would be in this beautiful room, and I have learned over the years that there are only two ways I can do an effective talk. One is with slides, and the other is to write it out and actually read it or perform it for you. And I was told that there would be no facilities in this room for slides, so we're going with Plan B. But I will hope to make it entertaining for you nonetheless. I want to thank Kathleen Dyer, Ray Hall, and Natalia for inviting me. And I also want to say a special thank you to Katie and Ray, because even a small conference, I know, is not an easy thing to put on. And you do have a wonderful campus. It's a beautiful campus. This building is gorgeous. I am a product of state schools, and I love them. And so I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to come here. But I know that it's a big deal to put on a conference, and you too have set a high bar in terms of being hosts. So thank you for that. I confess that I'm a bit surprised by being asked to speak at this conference at this time, because it's been over a decade since I published a syllabus. So I'm a bit out of the game. But I will try to be worthy of the assignment. Another thank you. I don't know whose idea it was to name this organization after Scott Lilienfeld, but it was a great idea. We tend to be rationalists and not romantics. We revere facts and data and not heroic figures. But if there is anyone who could be an inspiration to us, it is Scott Lilienfeld. It's an excellent choice. He exemplified a calm yet fearless probing of the world and a generosity of spirit that I've always strived to match. Finally, while I'm thanking people, I think we should all thank the James Randi Educational Foundation for giving this organization its 2025 award. There is no more deserving organization if we do say so ourselves, right? So that's great. I believe my purpose here at the beginning of the conference is to set the tone for what follows. And with this in mind, I'm drawn to talk about foundational things, the basics and beginnings. As part of that effort, I'm going to plug some golden oldies and stress the importance of a non-scientific discipline whose methods are often foreign to many of us. I have also managed to stuff into this talk almost everything I know about the teaching of critical thinking, so there will be no sequel. Unfortunately for you, this talk will not provide ideas for monetizing the teaching of critical thinking in an effort to line your pockets, attract students, or save your institutions. Nor will it have anything to say about artificial intelligence. On a positive note, it will soon become clear that this talk was not written using artificial intelligence. It was written with whatever natural, unenhanced intelligence I still possess at my advanced age. So here we go. It occurs to me that in many environments today, part of why people fail to listen and learn from one another is that the necessary groundwork for productive interaction is lacking. Here are two stories that get at this point. For the last quarter century, I have lived in a small village, and as a result, I've reaped many benefits not available to people who live in other environments. 50 years ago, long before Hillary Clinton wrote her book, an Englishman and a New Yorker magazine writer named Anthony Bailey published a book about the town I live in called In the Village. He moved his family there in part because the village is on the Connecticut coast and he was a sailor, but he soon saw many benefits of living there, and the basic message of his book was that we should all live in villages. For example, whenever one of his kids needed a new pair of shoes, he would hand them a $5 bill. This was in the 1970s, so, and send them down the street to the clothing store where the owner would take care of them. This casual approach, and perhaps a somewhat exciting mission for the child, was made possible because the owner of the shop knew Bailey. Most people in the village knew each other and had fitted him and his family with shoes before. Like any town, there were conflicts from time to time, but the simple interdependence of village life brought many benefits. By the time I moved to town, Bailey's village had changed. Many of the businesses he knew were gone, forcing people to drive to big box stores outside of town, and class divisions had become more exaggerated as wealthy people from Boston and New York bought summer homes. Today, many of the residents no longer live in the village year-round. But much of what Bailey recognized still remains. Despite being an introvert and something of a recluse and a crank, according to my essay on the beaches, merely by living in the town, I have come to know the post office clerk, the people who run the newsstand, the wait staff at the restaurants, the fire chief, and many others. Okay, where am I now? Oh, these are acquaintances, not friends. And in some cases, I know their names, but in many others, I don't. Importantly, I often know nothing of their political or religious beliefs. However, in a thought experiment in which I was trapped in an elevator with one of these people, and we were forced to talk politics, I'm confident that even if we discovered that we held diametrically opposed positions, it would be okay. We might not change each other's views, but we would listen to each other in a way that is far too rare today. Because in small ways, we depend on each other, and we are going to go on living in the same village after we get out of the elevator. We will need to count on each other. I've come to recognize, as Bailey did, despite being as weak as they are, these subtle bonds of connectedness are very valuable. Now, here's a different story that's a bit closer to home for all of you. I have a friend who teaches in the arts, and he asked me to review a text he produced for students and artists. In one section, he discussed the question of whether it was useful to know the artist's intention. He proposed that in most cases, it was unnecessary or even counterproductive to know the artist's intention. Once put out into the world, the novel, movie, painting, or play belonged as much to the audience as it did to the artist, and the audience's interpretation, even when it deviated from the artist's original idea, could contribute to the enjoyment of the work and be a valid reading. He was endorsing a version of the intentional fallacy from the mid-20th century school of new criticism, which suggested that only the words of the text matter, not the artist's biography or intention. However, my friend identified one situation in which knowing the artist's intention could be useful. If the artist produced art that was morally bad, it might be useful to know that the artist did not intend for the work to be morally bad. His text suggested that a student in his class, not just the student's work, but the student himself, could be judged morally bad on the basis of their work, and that explaining the student artist's intention might afford the possibility of grace or forgiveness. My friend is not a religious person, but suddenly he began to use words like grace and forgiveness. Furthermore, he held open the possibility that there were some things that were unforgivable. I'm clearly out of touch with the current world of academia, but I found these ideas shocking. And to be fair, I don't know how common this attitude is. It might be exceedingly rare. As current teachers, you would know better. But taken on its face, my friend's text suggested that students who enrolled in his class were assuming the risk of being labeled immoral. On the basis of their work in class, they could be judged as bad people. Furthermore, if they were unlucky enough to be placed in that category, there was a real possibility that the immoral person's crimes would be beyond the pale, unforgivable. After reading this material, I told my friend that I would be afraid to take his class. Although I did not raise this point, it seemed obvious that if these possible consequences were known to the students, the free expression of ideas would suffer greatly. Interestingly, I don't think any of these implications had occurred to him. He was just swimming in the waters of academia that had long ago become his world. Now I will try to make sense of these stories and bring them back to your efforts to teach critical thinking. As part of this effort, at no additional charge, I'm going to give you my core philosophy of life as taught to me many years ago by the 1960s avant-garde comedy group, the Firesign Theater. I suspect that most of you, perhaps all of you, are too young to get that reference, so Google it later. But if you do Google it, make sure you recognize that it's Firesign, S-I-G-N, not Fireside Theater. So here is my philosophy of life. We are all bozos on this bus. In a moral sense, we are all equal in the world, and most importantly, we are all doing the best and worst that we can. We are doing what we can. Under other circumstances, we might be able to do better than we are now, but that's what we call a counterfactual. Given the current facts, we are all doing what we can. One of the implications of this philosophy, and one that should be possible to promote in your classes, is the assumption that everyone is speaking in good faith. Barring the unlikely case that a severely disturbed person is enrolled in your class, within the confines of the classroom, it should be possible to begin with the premise that we are all working toward the goal of learning and understanding, and that no one intends to hurt anyone else. There must be room for disagreement, even serious disagreement, but in honestly expressing their ideas or presenting their work, no one should be risking their good moral standing. The concept of good faith has a long history in the law. It is seen as the requirement for parties to enter into a contract. The French legal scholar René Dumogue wrote in 1931, the contracting parties form a kind of microcosm. It is a small society where everyone must work toward a common goal, which is the sum of the individual goals pursued by each person, exactly as in a civil or commercial society. I am not usually a fan of the Cato Institute, but I found a useful text on their website. It reads in part, "A good faith argument or discussion is one in which both parties agree on the terms on which they engage, are honest and respectful of the other person's dignity, follow generally accepted norms of social interaction, and genuinely want to hear what the other person thinks and has to say. In many cases, they are working together towards a resolution that will be mutually satisfying. Good faith is similar to goodwill in that you wish the other party well and do not intend harm. A bad faith discussion is one in which one or both of the parties has a hidden, unrevealed agenda, often to dominate or coerce the other individual into compliance or acquiescence of some sort, or lacks basic respects for the rights, dignity, or autonomy of the other party. Disrespect for the other party may include dishonesty. A person engaged in bad faith does not accept the other person as they are, but demands that they change in order to satisfy certain requirements or accept their will. In general, it is always best to begin a discussion and to proceed with the presumption of mutual good faith until and unless otherwise, proven otherwise. I believe this attitude that I'm advocating here was one that Scott Lilienfeld would endorse. He and 3 graduate student co-authors wrote the cover story for the September, I am mentioning Skeptical Inquirer, the cover story for Skeptical Inquirer magazine on September-October issue in 2020, entitled Intellectual Humility, a Guiding Principle for the Skeptical Movement. The author suggested that there were a number of benefits of maintaining an attitude of humility and remembering that all knowledge is tentative and that at any point, new information could prove us wrong. It seems to me that intellectual humility also has a valuable way of leveling the playing field. Perhaps all of this seems obvious, but it's shocking to me how much of the current social and political discord is offered in blatant bad faith. Ad hominem attacks and name-calling are enjoying a growth period. And whenever they appear, it's a signal that we are no longer involved in a good faith conversation. I believe we urgently need to encourage good faith discussion on difficult topics whenever we can, and your campuses and classrooms are places where that should be possible. A college or a university is not a village, but it is a community, and a class is also a small community of people who share an interest in the goals of the class. To the extent that you as professors can encourage a sense of common purpose, good faith, and goodwill, I believe you will set the stage for better things to come. Now, I should remind you that the title of this talk is How to Change Beliefs by Not Changing Them. I thought that was rather clever, but you are owed an explanation. I have become increasingly convinced that as purveyors of critical thinking, science, and reason, we often spend far too much of the time on the end point of that process, debunking a particular crazy belief and trying to install a better one in its place. Now, that may sound like a contradiction with respect to the refutational approach, but I'm hoping that it's not as we go forward. I believe that in the long run, it is far more valuable to concentrate our efforts on the beginning of the process of belief formation. In my view, an important place to start is in establishing a norm of goodwill from which to grow a good faith discussion. I understand that in our disciplines, many of us spend most of our time in the solitary labor of collecting and analyzing data, and discussions about how we talk to each other may seem foreign. But in most contexts outside the laboratory, we encounter each other as social beings, and much critical thinking is done out loud. As part of the effort to create a conducive atmosphere, it's possible to do a few things that lower the stakes for your students. Here's an example of something I did in my classes. For many years, I taught a course called Irrational Behavior in the psychology department, which covered belief in the paranormal and superstition, among other things. At the beginning of the semester, I made a point of telling my students that I understood that they may believe in astrology or ghosts or black cats, and that was okay. They needn't confess that to me or to the class. If they wanted to bring up their belief, they could, and I hope they would feel comfortable enough to do so. But all I asked was that they employ the methods of analysis we used in class to try on a different way of thinking, like putting on a new suit. Of course, I hope that exercise might affect their beliefs as well, and that they might fake it until they made it. But I wanted them to understand that they would not be graded on their beliefs. Interestingly, one year after the class was over, a student approached me to do an honors thesis on the validity of astrology, particularly as a theory of personality. She conducted a study that produced negative results, surprise, surprise, and was eventually published. To her credit, she accepted the results of the study as valid, but her belief in astrology was unchanged. When she graduated, she gave me a book on sun signs. I gave it my best shot, but sometimes we miss. Of course, Carlos Orsi had not written his book on astrology yet, so maybe if he had at that point, things would have turned out better. I will share a few more ideas about how to create a productive atmosphere within our classes, but I'm going to stop here for a second and ask for a show of hands. This is the audience participation part of the talk. I want to see how many of us come from various disciplines. So I have sort of a sense, but let's do this as an exercise. Raise your hand if your discipline would be in the natural sciences like physics, chemistry, astronomy. Okay, look at that. Okay. How about in the life sciences, biology, medicine, psychology can be in there? Okay, more hands. That's good. All right. How about social sciences? Psychology sometimes is in there too. Sociology, anthropology, political science. Okay, good number of hands. How about the humanities, languages, philosophy, history, literature, religious studies? Oh, look at that. That's good. That's good. How about the arts? Do we have any artists, theater people, music people, creative? Oh, okay. We've hit a wall there. And I assume that some people might be considered to be in sort of applied disciplines. Journalism, we've heard library science, any others that would be, medicine could even be. Okay, so what I think comes out of this is that many of us are in the data-oriented fields than in science, either natural sciences, life sciences, or social sciences, where there is evidence and data being used. But in my view, many of the best tools for what we call critical thinking come from the non-empirical discipline of philosophy. So all of you out there who raised your hands. I don't know about you, but I took an intro to philosophy course in college and promptly forgot it all. Almost everything I know about philosophy I learned after I began teaching, first from colleagues in the philosophy department and later from reading that I did on my own. At first, it seemed pretty strange. For example, rather than conducting experiments, they had arguments. And as part of those arguments, they actually placed value in intuition. I still find that odd. But they also have figured out what constitutes an argument and what doesn't, and many of the best ways to think if you want to get to the truth. So here are some golden oldies, mostly drawn from the weird discipline of philosophy. One of the big problems with critical thinking is that there is no agreement about what the heck it is. It is a wonderful Rorschach test, but that ambiguity is a problem. As it turns out, I discovered, There are textbooks on critical thinking, typically written by philosophers, and I have found it useful to assign at least a few chapters from a basic critical thinking text to lay a foundation. Some of the things that I believe are useful in those texts include a basic understanding of rhetoric and the difference between a rhetorical device and an argument, the classic fallacies. I know that many of you teach those and are aware of them. Ad hominem, straw person, red herring, affirming the consequent. There are tons of fallacies, but teaching students to recognize some of the most common ones, I think, is a really important service. Logic can get complicated, but it's useful to teach students the basics of premises, conclusions, value statements versus fact statements, deductive versus inductive logic, etc. I have assigned Harry Frankfurt's little book On Bullshit, which makes a useful distinction between bullshitting and lying. Frankfurt argues persuasively, in my view, that bullshitting is worse than lying because the liar cares enough about the truth to hide it. The bullshitter doesn't care about the truth at all and just wants to succeed in the short term. As a result, bullshitting is a far greater destructive force. In the years since it first appeared, On Bullshit has only gained importance, in my view. Peirce's The Fixation of Belief from 1877 is a real golden oldie that is still very useful. Charles Sanders Peirce was a polymath genius, also a drug addict, a wife abuser, spendthrift, and all-around difficult person. Nonetheless, William James was very admiring of him and credited Peirce with founding American pragmatist philosophy, primarily with 2 essays published in Popular Science Monthly, The Fixation of Belief in 1877 and How to Make Our Ideas Clear in 1878. In The Fixation of Belief, as I'm sure many of you know, he identifies 4 ways of acquiring belief: authority. In this case, I think he was thinking of priests and not Dr. Anthony Fauci. Tenacity, simply holding fast to what you believe because you believed it in the past. A priori, which we would probably refer to as intuition, believing something because it fits into our prior beliefs. And also, finally, science. So Peirce would not go very far in Peirce did not go very far in fleshing out what he meant by science, but we get the idea. Peirce's 4 categories create a framework for asking students why they believe what they do, and as we descend into a new Middle Ages, these ways of thinking about fixing knowledge are increasingly useful tools. Finally, Peirce was aware of the psychological forces that make each of the 3 least favored methods appealing. The essay includes a great quote about belief in an afterlife in heaven that I cannot resist sharing. Thus, if it be true that death is annihilation, then the man who believes that he will certainly go straight to heaven when he dies, providing he has fulfilled certain simple observances in this life, has a cheap pleasure which will not be followed by the least disappointment. Peirce used to be included in psychology research texts, but I have a sense he's fallen away lately. I don't know. Something else I learned from my philosophy colleagues: when philosophy students write a paper taking a position on a question, they are routinely asked to identify the best objections to their point of view and respond to them. They must state their opponent's views as clearly as possible and do their best to answer them. How well they accomplish this exercise is factored into the quality of their argument. Obviously, this is an excellent practice in perspective taking that we non-philosophers should build into our classes wherever we can. Similarly, given the endemic nature of confirmation bias and jumping to conclusions, it is a useful exercise to ask students to generate alternative hypotheses about the events they witness in everyday life. I recognize that if you're a physics or a biology professor, it may not be possible to work much of this material into your classes. Even in psychology, I found it difficult, but I occasionally volunteered to teach a first-year seminar called Psychology and Critical Thinking. I had to fight for the course because it subtracted a class from my department's beleaguered offerings. But it had a relatively small enrollment. It was capped at 15. And because it was not restricted to majors, afforded me a bit more freedom. In the first year seminar, I could assign a critical thinking text, Frankfurt's on bullshit, versus fixation of belief, and other material that would be more difficult to assign in a course for majors. Early in the semester, I assigned the This I Believe writing project. Some of you may be familiar with this. You may know that it was started as a radio program hosted by Edward R. Murrow in the 1950s, and it was revived by NPR in the early 2000s. There are instructors' guidelines at thisibelieve.org, as well as hundreds of archived audio essays. I pitched the assignment as a low-stakes 500 to 600 word warm-up essay. On occasion, with the students' permission, essays would be shared with the rest of the class. My favorite of the NPR archived essays is a 2005 piece by Deirdre Sullivan called Always Go to the Funeral. In a tangible example of the power of writing, Sullivan's piece has had a lasting effect on me. I am old enough now that I go to a fair number of funerals, and despite all the God talk and the occasional awkwardness, I almost never regret it. One of the most thoughtful essays I got from a student was always take public transportation. She quite persuasively enumerated many benefits of merging with the great throng of humanity in buses, trains, and subway cars. I saw the exercise as a way for young students to write about something that was important to them in good faith, with the possibility that someone else, the instructor at very least, would be reading it. Of course, some students missed the mark. I had one piece written by a student who believed that pencils were better than pens. The essay actually wasn't that bad, but he didn't quite, get to the point of the assignment. Later in the class, I gave my students a little instruction in the American college debate process and assigned groups of 4 students, 2 teams of 2, to come up with a proposition that they could debate. Crucially, they had to choose a topic that had 2 reasonable sides, and they wrote the proposition not knowing whether they would have to argue the affirmative or the negative side. Once I'd given feedback on the topics and they were locked down, a couple of weeks before the debates, the assigned sides were determined in class with a coin flip. As you can imagine, this often resulted in students having to argue their non-preferred position on the issue, which I always thought was a good exercise. In addition, by the time the debate had rolled around, they had studied some basic logic and the fallacies, and my instructor's heart would flutter whenever I heard a debater correctly identify a fallacy or some other rhetorical device in the presentation of the other side. To sum it up, I'm now moving towards the end. That's a signal. I've given you a somewhat random list of ideas and activities, and many may not be useful to you. But if there's a coherent theme to this talk, and there may not be, it is that although as subject matter experts, we are anxious to share our knowledge and debunk false beliefs, it can be useful to turn down the temperature and focus on the process of belief formation and reasoning rather than the products of those activities. As a psychologist, I understand that beliefs don't always drive behavior. Sometimes our actions come first and we formalize our beliefs later on. But to the extent that beliefs do drive behavior, I would encourage you to help students understand where their beliefs come from and to examine the basis of those beliefs. Over the years, I've realized that philosophers have developed some tools that can be helpful for us in this effort. Finally, as part of this process, I would encourage you to do what you can to create a village within your classrooms, a space where even very difficult topics can be discussed without risking moral approbation or excommunication, and where people care enough to listen to each other, because, as it turns out, we are all bozos on this bus. Thank you.
If we want to spend a few minutes asking some questions of Dr. Vyse, We are in this room until 4:30. I think the library closes at 4:30. So we have a few posters in the back. So we have a little bit of time, about an hour, and maybe we can just have some questions for Dr. Vyse.
A philosopher. It was Moore and somebody. You know the one? It's a very popular one, and I just use it, and I used it specifically in that freshman class. I thought it was very valuable. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that, and it was very workbook oriented, which was not necessarily the best thing, but I could get a lot out of it, out of just the early chapters, and then that was it. So, but I look forward to your book coming out.
Very appreciative of this talk.
Oh, good.
Philosophers have a lot to add to.
I think they do. I think they do. And I don't, and it is, you know, as I said, that's why I did the hand raising thing, is that most of the hands that went up were not from fields where this material, you know, enters in very often. And I think there is a lot to be gained from at least a bit of it. And especially, as I say, that so much of we engage in conflict, you know, verbal conflict, and yet there are no real rules. People don't recognize. I mean, just the simple issue of ad hominem, you know, that one, you know, fallacy is just, you know, gone crazy lately, and should be recognized by people who see it for what it is. Yes. That's you. Another philosopher, by the way.
When you were using the example of the essay assignment, looking for the best opposing view, something similar can be done in all the hard sciences and social sciences.
Yeah.
If you look historically, things where there were conflicts and disagreements all the way through the development of all the respective disciplines. If there were a way of presenting past publications where the experts were disagreeing and having students resolve or discuss who had the better argument in that development of the discipline.
Right.
I mean, there could be short excerpts of those, and then it'd be also a way of modeling the scientific method.
Yeah.
And that it was the whole discipline has been a process of improving its self-discipline.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, as I was thinking about this for the talk, I was thinking about, I can only speak for my own discipline of psychology, which is that, you know, and of course we're teaching this format of writing an experimental paper to all the students in my discipline. And so the typical pattern, you know, is you have to write an introduction in which you deal with all the other, the things that, you know, have been done before. And of course, the main purpose of that is to eke out some new thing that you're going to do that might add to that. And then you do your experiment and hear your results. But I think that, you know, what should happen in the discussion of the outcome is a fulsome, you know, discussion of, okay, what are the weaknesses of this paper? And I think it is done in many papers and I think editors require that, or journals require that, but I don't think it's done really as consistently as it could be. That basically it's like, see, we did it, you know, and that other guy was wrong, and that's that. But to start from the beginning for students writing papers or whatever, knowing that they have to anticipate the arguments, the opposing arguments, I think that's a very useful thing. I'm also struck by just the simple inability to generate alternative hypotheses for things that happen. That is, something that we can teach to students. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Right. Right.
so that they do it, training others to actually help people to train themselves.
Mm,
And obviously gives other people permission to train us as well.
right.
They have to grant them that. And it's a half-baked idea I wanted to get your response.
Well, I think you should. I think you should. I think you should fully bake it. It sounds good. I mean, one of the things that strikes me is that, you know, generally speaking, your students want to please you, and you do have some, you know, some of that tangential control that I talked about among people in your classroom. And I think that there's a way that, at least within the confines of that class and the things that go on there, that you can set a tone and say, look, we're all, you know, I could be wrong, you could be wrong. There, you know, that humility. And I think that can only help in terms of allowing people to feel free to say what they want to say. And I'm just, you know, I'm sure the reason I chose that theme today is partly because of what's going on around us in the world. But you know, it also seems to fit, I think, with what you're all attempting to do in your classes. So. Yes, Natalia.
Did you ever have a student change like a core belief, something that was really, really important to them after taking one of your courses?
I can't. I don't know about. I don't. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I mean, that's another problem, which of course we skip over, is that there's the outcome measures for all these things we're doing are often lacking. I have had students who've come to me. It's interesting. Sometimes there's an incubation period. Like I had a student who, in fact, some of you know this person, but I had a student who took my class, and it was just sort of a class. I think she was, you know, somewhat drawn to the topic, but she came to recognize the value of it much later, and it became a huge part of her life. She became an active skeptic, and that was very gratifying. But you know, I think that the best, you know, in some cases we have to be satisfied with fairly modest changes, and the most valuable thing I think of all is as I was saying, to give our students a vocabulary for understanding the way discourse happens, what's going on in a discussion of various things. There are completely other topics that I did not cover that we need to do too, like making sure that people understand what a subject matter expert is versus someone who's not, and you know, the kind of media literacy that was talked about earlier, but some of the stuff from philosophy, I think, can be very useful tools if the students can acquire the vocabulary. Yes.
Building on what you were both saying, we have to remind ourselves that we are sowing seeds, and whether they germinate, it's out of our control. And if by any chance, luckily, they do germinate, when they germinate, that is also out of our control.
Yeah.
So
Right.
there are limited impact.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. Well, that was true in that one case. So. Yes.
Stuart, why do you think it's so hard to convince the university that teaching critical thinking is an important thing? You told about your experience, Natalia told about their experience. We all know about it, how hard it is to convince the board of university that critical thinking.
Well, I mean, in my case, it was simply a question of the demands of the institution. You know, psychology classes are heavily over-enrolled in many schools, and it was true there. I mean, what made that one class, which I think in some ways was the most valuable possible, was that the institution had chosen to give every student a small seminar experience in their first year. We don't say freshman anymore, and so you know, that was the opening, right? And departments were supposed to donate courses to that effort, right? And we didn't typically, because we were too over enrolled. We all felt like we had to work, deal with our majors. But it gave me the chance to then say, well, wait a second, I want to do this course, and so on. And so of course we now know, as of the poster over here, that the Cal State system requires it. So I thank whoever made that happen. But there are clearly opportunities at other schools where that could happen. So anyway, yes, I think your name is Stuart. Is that correct? And yours, and you spell it correctly. If I, that's the important thing.
So I find that the metaphor of the village in fashion very appealing, and the story of the artist as well kind of interesting. But I want to try to balance that with the notion that I don't think education should be risk-free.
Yeah.
And as you know, universities and college administrators are pushing us to make it more and more risk-free, to make it
Right. Right.
a more and more risk-free place. I don't think we feel it's.
Yeah.
How do we balance that?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's. I mean, first of all, I think it's a good question. I mean, again, in a critical thinking class, I think, or if the kind of classes that we're talking about, the title suggests and the subject matter suggests that there might be some, interaction, but that it should be civil. I push back a little bit. I mean, the example that I gave of the artist, right? I think that there is a lack of civility. That risk of being called a racist or being called something else is there, and that I don't think is always going to be pushed back against by the institution. It's going to be, in some cases, supported by the institution. So that's why I know that was sort of a tricky example to bring into this talk, but I felt it was important to do so. And again, I don't know how typical it might have been, but so I think that yes, we do need to toughen up the students to be able to deal with these things, but in the right way, in a way that is in good faith, right? In other words, the difficult conversation had without going to "you're a bad person," right? And which is like the nuclear option, sort of, and shuts down conversation and makes for very uncomfortable circumstances. So anyway, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's part of. I mean, in the case of when you're making art, right? You are doing that. You are bringing your personal self into the room, right? And as far as personal experiences, I think it depends. I mean, I think I think that sometimes it can be it may sort of make it more difficult to have conversation when someone's personal experience is in the middle of the room. I haven't had that experience too much in my own case, but I'm sure it does happen. I've used my own experiences as I did today, but I try to do it in ways that are fairly light and yet illustrative, right? So I can't make any flat statement about that. I think it really depends on the situation and the case and the kind of course. So. But I understand it is an issue. Yeah. One more from the philosopher in the back. We're four.
Thing I want to emphasize about philosophy is humility, and specifically intellectual humility, is a virtue, right?
Right.
This is how we often talk about it in philosophy, along with intellectual courage, intellectual honesty, right? These are virtues, and virtues are kind of bread and butter in philosophy, right? And so if this is what is needed in order to get students to embrace critical thinking and for the goals that we have, we do have to try to instill certain intellectual virtues into our students, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can learn from philosophy from this. Like Aristotle taught us that the way to do this is with practice, right? You become a virtuous person,
right?
Not just with intellectual. You become a virtuous person,
yeah,
by doing it over and over again, and
right?
getting the habit of doing it until it's automatic. You do it without thinking about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we're going to teach the intellectual virtues to our students to be able to get them to reject the suicides, that kind of stuff, this lends itself to the reputational approach. They need practice over and over again. We need to do this over and over again and keep doing it until it becomes a habit and it becomes automatic, right? And so we get that intellectual habits, but also the intellectual humility, the intellectual honesty, say I don't know, the intellectual humility to admit that I was wrong, I'm going to change my mind, and partly to get them to value truth for its own sake, which is not something that you need a scientific argument for. But we see truth as something that's valuable in and of itself. And
right.
That's the kind of virtue or value that we have to try to instill in our students.
Mm-hmm.
And until they do that,
right.
They don't care about the other.
Right, they don't.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. That's a really important point because in everyday dialogue, getting the truth is not the goal. Winning is the goal, and so changing that value system is, really important. Yeah. Well.
To build on the virtues, it's something that is typically neglected in your standard critical thinking course, and the reason why those intellectual dispositions are so important is that even if someone masters the intellectual skills, if there were not those values
right.
influencing the application of
That's
those
right.
skills, we simply are creating a more articulate bigot.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
Individual,
yeah.
A more articulate racist.
Yeah.
And so, and that's, I hope there'll be discussions, bounce ideas as to how to infuse those virtues in our respective courses, in our respective disciplines.
Yeah.
Because without that,
right.
The impact is
it's a good point. That's the nightmare scenario, that you just make them better at being bad. But anyway, I think we should end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vyse. Many thanks to Stuart for starting the conversation, and I'm delighted that there are so many things that we have on the table already to discuss over the next couple of days. Please visit the posters in the back of the room. They will be up in our MBA classroom, but from now until we leave, I have asked the poster presenters to kind of stand by their posters. So if you want to talk to the folks who have done the work over there, now is the time. You can catch them later in the week also, but now is a good time for that. Thank you.